My stepfather showed up at the hospital with a smile, a fresh set of clothes, and a plan for my mother's house. She had just come out of surgery, barely able to sit up, and he thought that was the perfect moment to take everything my dead father left behind. My name is Nolan Mercer. I was 36 years old when my mother came out of surgery with a line of stitches under her gown, a bag of medication in her lap, and nowhere safe to go. Even now, saying that out loud makes my jaw tighten. That morning had started in the stale, over-air-conditioned waiting room of St. Anne's Medical Center. The lights were too bright. The coffee tasted burned. Every few minutes, the automatic doors hissed open and shut, letting in little gusts of cold air and worried families. I sat there with my elbows on my knees, staring at the floor tiles, replaying the last thing my mother had said before the nurses rolled her away. Don't argue with Victor while I'm gone. He gets strange when he feels left out. That was my mother. Even on the day surgeons were cutting into her abdomen to remove a mass that had been tormenting her for months, she was still managing the emotions of the man who was supposed to be taking care of her. Victor Hale, my stepfather. He had been in my life since I was 12. Tall, polished, always smelling faintly of cedar cologne and expensive mouthwash. To outsiders, he was the kind of man who held doors open, sent thank you cards, and spoke in that calm, measured voice people mistook for maturity. But living with him, or even just orbiting around him, taught me something uglier. Some men didn't need to shout to control a room. Some men did it with pauses, with sighs, with little comments that landed like fishhooks under the skin. By the time I was old enough to name what he was, my mother was already too deep in it. She had married my father, Daniel Mercer, when they were both young and broke and stupidly in love. At least that was how she described it. My father died when I was 8. Sudden aneurysm. One day he was teaching me how to skip stones at Lake Alder. 2 days later, he was in a casket, and my mother looked like someone had scooped the center out of her chest and left the rest standing. What she never fully lost, though, was his name. Not literally. She remarried, yes, took Hale on paperwork, played the role. But the life my father built, the real foundation under her feet, never came from Victor. It came from the quiet, careful planning my father had done before he died. He had been the cautious type, not rich, not private jet rich, but smart, disciplined. He'd inherited land money from his own father, sold part of it, invested well, and put our family home and a few other assets into a trust before I was old enough to understand what that meant. I didn't know the full details back then. I just knew that after Dad died, Mom never had to panic sell the house. She never had to move us into some tiny apartment. We stayed in the same gray colonial on Briar Glen Road, with the wraparound porch and the old maple tree in the yard. The house where my father had carried me on his shoulders. The house where my mother still kept one faded photo of them in a drawer she thought no one knew about. Victor moved into that house 4 years after my father died, and from the beginning, he acted like he had rescued us. I remember the first week he was there. He stood in the kitchen, one hand around a coffee mug, looking out at the backyard like a man inspecting property he intended to improve. "This place needs structure," he said. I was 12. I was sitting at the table eating cereal gone soggy in milk. My mother laughed nervously and asked what he meant. He smiled. "I just mean a home reflects the man leading it." Even then, something cold moved through me. Over the years, Victor changed small things first. The curtains, the furniture, the color of the dining room walls. Then he moved on to less visible things. He decided which relatives were draining, which neighbors were too nosy, which of my mother's old habits were sentimental clutter. He never ripped my father out of the house all at once. That would have caused a fight. He did it slowly, like peeling labels off old jars until there was no proof of what had once been inside. And my mother let him. Or maybe that's too cruel. Maybe she adapted. Maybe surviving one great loss had made her vulnerable to a quieter one. By the time I was in college, Victor had become the official voice of the household. If the roof needed repairs, he handled the contractor. If taxes were discussed, he inserted himself. If anyone asked about the house, he'd say things like, "Homeownership teaches you a lot," and my mother would go silent beside him. That silence used to make my stomach knot. I wanted to call him out 100 times. I almost did, but my mother always stopped me with the same look. Tired, pleading. Not now, so I learned distance. I moved to Columbus after graduate school, built a career in commercial design, and kept my visits short. Birthdays, Christmas, emergencies. Every time I came back to Briar Glen, the house felt less like my childhood home and more like a stage set someone else had dressed. Victor's leather chair in the den, Victor's framed golf print in the hallway, Victor's monogrammed towels in the downstairs bathroom. But underneath all that, the bones of the place were still my father's. I could feel it, in the creak of the third stair, in the way the late afternoon sun hit the living room floor, in the smell of the basement after rain, and my mother knew it too. She just never said it in front of him. The call about her surgery came 6 weeks before it happened. She tried to sound calm when she told me, "It's routine," she said. "Nothing that begins with a specialist and a mass and a scheduled hospital stay feels routine." I drove down the next weekend. She was thinner than I remembered. Her smile came slower. Victor, meanwhile, was in rare form, attentive when anyone could see him, irritable the second we were alone. At dinner, he poured wine for himself and my mother, then looked at me and said, "No need for you to hover, Nolan. Married women recover better when the household stays stable." I actually laughed because I thought surely he heard himself. He didn't laugh back. My mother touched my wrist under the table. A tiny warning. Her fingers felt cold. Later that night, when Victor went upstairs to shower, she stood with me in the kitchen while the dishwasher hummed. The room was dim except for the stove light. She looked smaller there than I had ever seen her. "If something feels off while I'm in the hospital," she said quietly, "call Mary Ann." "Who's Mary Ann?" "Your father's old attorney retired. Mary Ann was his junior associate. She handles the trust now." That got my attention. I turned fully toward her. "Why are you telling me that now?" She hesitated. I could hear water running upstairs through the pipes. "Because Victor's been asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About deeds, about refinancing, about whether I ever updated the estate documents after remarriage." The muscles in my neck tightened. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that some things were never his business." For the first time in years, I saw a flash of the woman my father must have fallen in love with. Not just gentle, steel beneath it, but the flash passed quickly. She looked toward the ceiling, toward the sound of Victor moving above us, and her shoulders folded inward again. "He thinks the house should be simpler," she said. "Cleaner, easier to transfer." "Transfer to who?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. When surgery day came, Victor was late to the hospital. Late. My mother was already in a gown, already answering pre-op questions, already trying not to show fear. And he drifted in with a paper cup in one hand and some excuse about traffic. His hair was perfect. His shoes were polished. He kissed her forehead like a man performing concern for an audience. I watched her eyes when he did it. She didn't lean toward him. She endured him. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, hard click inside my chest. I stopped thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. I stopped thinking, maybe he's just difficult. No. In that moment I knew. If my mother came out of surgery weak, medicated, vulnerable, Victor was going to make everything about himself, and I had the sick feeling it was going to be worse than even she feared. The surgeon finally came out a little after noon, mask hanging loose around his neck, blue cap still on, eyes tired but steady. I stood so fast the plastic chair legs scraped hard against the floor. He told me the surgery had gone well. The mass was out. They'd need pathology to confirm everything. But for now, she was stable. Stable. That word hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. I thanked him twice, maybe 3 times. I don't even remember. Victor arrived at my side just in time to hear the good news, then let out a long breath, like he had carried the burden himself. "Well," he said, smoothing the front of his coat, "that's that. That's that." I turned and looked at him. Really looked at him. His expression wasn't relieved. It was inconvenienced, like a delayed flight had finally been rebooked. When they let us see her in recovery, my mother was pale and drifting in and out, lips dry, eyelids heavy. There was a tube in her arm, another line under the blanket, and that awful chemical smell hospitals seemed to press into everything. I moved to her left side and took her hand carefully. Her skin felt papery, cool. Victor stayed at the foot of the bed for less than a minute before checking his phone. "She'll sleep for hours," he murmured. "There's no point crowding her." Crowding her. I didn't answer. My mother's fingers twitched faintly in mine, and I leaned closer. "Mom," I whispered. "It's me, Nolan. Surgery's over. You did great." Her lashes fluttered. For 1 second, her eyes opened halfway, blurry, confused. Then they found me. Not Victor. Me. Her mouth moved. I bent lower. "What?" "Home," she whispered. That one word lodged under my ribs. Not "I'm thirsty." Not "does it hurt." Home. I squeezed her hand. "We'll get you somewhere safe." Victor heard me. I know he did, because when I straightened up, he gave me a look so flat and warning heavy it almost made me laugh. Some men threaten with volume. Victor did it with silence. I stayed until evening. Victor left twice, once for lunch, once because he said he had calls to make. By 6, my mother was moved to a private room. She was awake longer now, though groggy, her face pinched each time she shifted. I adjusted her water cup, helped the nurse settle her blankets, and read through the discharge notes they'd left on the tray table. No stairs if possible. No heavy lifting. Medication every 6 hours. Watch for fever. Watch for bleeding. Watch for disorientation. Watch for everything. Victor walked in right as I finished reading, carrying a bouquet that looked like it had been grabbed from a lobby cooler. "Still here?" he asked. I stared at him. "She's my mother." "Yes, and she's my wife, which means I'll be taking her home tomorrow." Something in my chest tightened. "No," I said. He blinked once, like he hadn't heard me correctly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." He set the flowers down with maddening care. "Nolan, this isn't a debate." My mother stirred weakly at the sound of our voices. I lowered mine immediately, but I didn't back down. "She needs rest, actual rest, not your version of it." His jaw flexed. "And what exactly is that supposed to mean?" I laughed under my breath, but there was no humor in it. "It means I know how things are in that house." His eyes narrowed. "You know nothing about my marriage. I should have let it go then. For her, for the room. But I was tired, scared, and suddenly done pretending." "I know enough," I said. "I know she warned me about you before they wheeled her into surgery." That landed. I saw it in the tiny shift of his mouth. "She was medicated and frightened," he snapped softly. "Don't twist the words of a vulnerable woman to suit your fantasies." Fantasy. The nurse came in then, checking the chart, and Victor stepped back instantly, face smoothing over into concern. It was almost impressive, the transformation. 1 second hard and contemptuous, the next a worried husband asking gentle questions about pain management. The second the nurse left, he leaned close to me and said, barely above a whisper, "You will not poison this recovery with your adolescent resentment." I stared at him. Adolescent. I was 36 years old, paying my own mortgage, running my own team, sitting beside my mother's hospital bed after surgery while he slipped out for lunch and phone calls. And he still spoke to me like I was some sulking boy at his table. That was Victor's favorite trick. Shrink the other person. Make them defend their own adulthood, their own memory, their own sanity. I stood up slowly. I'm staying tonight, I said. He gave a humorless smile. No, you're not. I looked at my mother. Her eyes were closed again, but her breathing had changed. Too shallow, too alert. She was listening. So I made my voice calm, deliberate. Yes, I am. For a second, I thought he might actually make a scene. But Victor loved appearances too much. Hospital hallway, nurses nearby, security cameras. Not his kind of battlefield. So he picked up his coat and gave me one last look. Don't confuse access with authority, Nolan. Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room seemed to exhale. I sat back down and rubbed a hand over my face. My mother opened her eyes a few minutes later. She looked exhausted but clear. Did he go? She whispered. That question broke something in me. Not how long was I asleep? Not did the doctor come back? Did he go? Yeah, I said quietly. He's gone. She closed her eyes again. Relief moved across her face so fast and so raw that I had to look away. I stayed the night in the vinyl recliner by the window. The room hummed with soft machine sounds and the distant squeak of wheels in the hallway. Every time she stirred, I woke. Around 3 in the morning, rain started tapping against the glass. Thin at first, then steady. She woke once and asked for water. Once for help adjusting the blanket. And once, just before dawn, she looked at me through the gray half-light and said, "He's been angry about the house." There it was. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Tell me, her throat worked. He found an old folder in the study. Tax papers, trust statements. He realized more of it was protected than he thought. Protected? I kept my face neutral, but my pulse kicked hard. What did he think? He thought marrying me gave him control eventually. She smiled faintly, bitterly. Victor always assumes time is a legal argument. I almost smiled, but it died quickly. Did he threaten you? Her silence answered first. Then, not directly. That meant yes. With Victor, it always meant yes. He said recovery changes priorities. That maybe I'd finally stop clinging to old sentimental structures. He said the house was too large for one woman if anything happened to him. I blinked. If anything happened to him? She nodded weakly. He likes to speak in puzzles when he wants deniability. My hands clenched together so hard my knuckles popped. He's been pushing me to sign papers, she said. A property simplification packet, he called it. Some transfer language. Joint occupancy revisions. I refused. I sat very still. Did you sign anything? No. Did he leave them with you? I think they're in his desk now, or the study. I don't know. The rain outside got harder. The whole window trembled softly with it. My mother watched me for a moment, then said the one thing I didn't expect. Nolan, if I go back there right now, I won't be able to fight him. I looked up sharply. She turned her face toward the ceiling, embarrassed by her own honesty. I'm too tired, too sore, too foggy. He knows that. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about discomfort. This wasn't just about a difficult recovery in a tense household. Victor had been waiting for weakness. Not illness exactly. Opportunity. A woman in pain. A woman on medication. A woman who might sign something to stop an argument, to avoid a scene, to sleep. I stood up so fast the chair rocked back. You're not going back there, I said. She looked at me, fear and hope mixing in her eyes. Nolan? No. I crossed to the window, then back again, too full of adrenaline to sit still. My mind was already moving. Logistics, medication, guest room, work calls I'd have to cancel, the drive, the legal side, Marianne, especially Marianne. I'm calling her this morning, I said. Victor will be furious. I don't care. You should, she whispered. He gets reckless when he feels cornered. I stopped at the foot of her bed. For years, that sentence would have made me pause, recalculate, adjust myself around the shape of his temper. Not anymore. Then he can be reckless somewhere else. She stared at me, and for the first time since I'd gotten to the hospital, I saw tears gather in her eyes. Not dramatic tears, not sobbing, just a sudden, silent gloss, like her body had finally found a tiny crack where all the pressure could leak out. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That almost undid me. I moved closer and took her hand carefully again. For what? For letting it get this far. I shook my head immediately. "No, yes." Her voice broke. "After your father died, I got so tired, Nolan. I thought choosing someone steady mattered more than choosing someone kind. And then by the time I understood the difference," she swallowed hard, "I kept thinking I could manage him." I sat on the edge of the chair and lowered my voice. "Mom, listen to me. You don't have to explain him to me. I know exactly what he is." She searched my face, maybe trying to see if I meant it. I did, because suddenly all of it clicked. The old comments, the little humiliations, the way he inserted himself into financial conversations but pretended disinterest when challenged, the way he performed gentleness in public and pressure in private, the way he treated every boundary like a temporary obstacle. He hadn't just married into my father's house. He'd been circling my father's legacy for years. Around 8, the day nurse came in with discharge updates. Maybe tomorrow afternoon if everything looked good. Maybe sooner if pain stayed controlled. I asked practical questions: mobility, prescription timing, car ride limits. She answered them all, then glanced between me and my mother with the knowing look nurses seem to develop after seeing 1,000 family dynamics. "Make sure she recovers somewhere calm," she said. Calm? I almost laughed. The second she left, I stepped into the hallway and called Mary Ann. She answered on the third ring, voice crisp, awake, efficient. "Mary Ann Cole, this is Nolan Mercer, Claire Mercer's son." A beat, then warmth. "Nolan, your mother told me I might hear from you one day. I was hoping it would be under better circumstances." So was I. I stood by the vending machines, one hand pressed to my forehead, and told her everything. The surgery, Victor's pressure, the trust papers, the house, the packet my mother refused to sign. Mary Ann didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "Do not let her sign anything. Not one page. Not one acknowledgement slip. Nothing. She won't." "Good. Second, I need you to understand this clearly. Your father's trust was written very carefully. The house is not Victor's. It was never Victor's. And unless your mother voluntarily alters certain protections while competent and uncoerced, it never becomes Victor's." Some of the air returned to my lungs. "But," Mary Ann continued, "that doesn't stop someone from trying to manipulate occupancy, access, refinancing leverage, or emergency spousal claims, especially if they think she's too exhausted to push back." That cold click happened in me again. Exactly. "What do?" I asked. "You remove her from his reach immediately after discharge. Then you bring me every paper he's tried to put in front of her, every text if you have them, every voicemail. And Nolan, yeah, if he realizes he's losing access to her decisions, he may escalate. Stay ahead of him." I looked through the small hallway window at the parking lot, gray with rain. Too late, I thought. He already had. And I had the sick, rising feeling that the second Victor learned my mother wasn't coming back to that house alone, the real war was going to start. I barely had time to slip my phone back into my pocket before I saw him. Victor was striding down the hallway toward my mother's room with a garment bag over one shoulder and that same controlled expression on his face, the one he used when he wanted to look reasonable while planning something ugly. His shoes clicked against the polished floor. His jaw was set. He looked like a man arriving to collect property. The second he saw me standing there, he slowed. "Nolan," he said evenly, "you're in the way." I didn't move. He glanced toward the room, then back at me. "I brought Claire fresh clothes. I assumed she'd prefer dignity over hospital gowns." There it was. The performance. Thoughtful husband. Practical man. Calm provider. I folded my arms. She's not discharging to Briar Glen. For the first time in 2 days, his face actually cracked. Not much, just a flicker. But I saw it. What did you just say? You heard me. He took 2 more steps until we were standing close enough that I could smell his aftershave. You are not making medical decisions for my wife. I'm not making them. She is. That woman is post-operative, medicated, and emotionally fragile. I stared at him. Interesting. Because last night you were ready to take her home yourself. His nostrils flared. A nurse passed at the far end of the corridor, and Victor lowered his voice instantly. This little rebellion of yours ends now. No, I said. What ends now is you cornering her while she's weak. His eyes sharpened. Be very careful. That almost made me smile. For years that line would have worked on me. Be careful. Don't push. Don't upset the balance. But standing under those fluorescent lights, with my mother still sore and stitched and afraid inside that room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt clean, not happy, not calm, just clean. Like all the fog he'd spent years blowing into our lives had finally burned off. I talked to Marianne, I said. That hit harder than I expected. Victor went still, really still. Then he gave a tight, humorless laugh. Of course you did. Digging up old lawyers now. Jesus, Nolan, you always did need drama to feel useful. I leaned in just enough for him to hear me clearly. She says the house was never yours. She says if you've been pressuring my mother to sign anything while she's in this condition, you're playing a dangerous game. His expression changed again. Not fear, not yet, but calculation. Fast, ugly calculation. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said. Then let's bring the papers into the light. He stared at me for a long second. Then he smiled. That was the worst version of him. Not angry Victor, smiling Victor. Fine, he said softly. Let's ask Claire. He stepped around me and pushed into the room before I could block him without causing a scene. My mother looked up from the bed, already tense the second she saw him. I watched her shoulders draw in under the blanket. Victor crossed the room like he belonged there, set the garment bag on the chair, smoothed the front of his coat. Then he turned to her with a face full of concern, so practiced it made my skin crawl. Darling, he said. Nolan seems confused. He thinks you're not coming home. My mother looked at me, then at him. I saw the fear in her eyes, and beneath it, something else. Exhaustion. The kind that makes even simple truth feel expensive. Victor moved closer to the bed. Tell him. I stepped in immediately. Don't do that. He ignored me. Claire, he said, voice low and patient. Tell your son you're coming back with me where you belong. The room was silent except for the soft beep of the monitor and the distant squeak of a cart in the hallway. My mother's breathing got shallower. I could actually see her fighting for air through the pressure of the moment. Then she surprised both of us. No, she whispered. Victor blinked. My mother swallowed and said it again, louder this time, though her voice still trembled. No, I'm not coming back with you. The change in him was immediate. He didn't explode. That would have been easier. Instead, all warmth drained out of his face. His eyes turned flat, dead flat. Claire, he said, you're tired. I'm tired of being managed. That landed like a slap. I moved closer to the bed, not touching her, just there. A wall, if she needed one. Victor looked from her to me and back again. He was losing the room, losing control, and he knew it. You're letting him poison you against your own husband while you're drugged and vulnerable, he said. My mother flinched, but didn't fold. No, she said. I'm finally hearing myself think. For a second, I thought he might say something truly unforgivable. Something so sharp, it would cut the last thread holding his mask together. But the nurse walked in with a tablet and discharge paperwork, and once again Victor had to become civilized. He stepped back, smiled tightly, asked a question about antibiotics. It almost would have worked if I hadn't seen the look he gave my mother when the nurse turned away. Cold, punishing, promising. The discharge took another 3 hours. Insurance delays, pharmacy confusion. One prescription that had to be resent. By the time I wheeled my mother out through the sliding hospital doors, the rain had stopped and the world smelled washed raw. Wet pavement, mulch, car exhaust. Victor was waiting at the curb. Of course he was. He stood beside his sedan with the trunk open, as if all of this had just been a misunderstanding that would now resolve itself in his favor. He looked at the wheelchair, then at me. "Get her in," he said. I almost laughed. My mother gripped the armrest. I crouched in front of her so she didn't have to look up at either of us. "You're coming with me," I said quietly. "Only if that's still what you want." Her eyes filled instantly, but she nodded. "Yes." I stood and looked at Victor. "You heard her." He slammed the trunk shut. "This is not legal," he snapped. "It is when your wife chooses it. She is under the influence of pain medication." The nurse who had wheeled us out paused at that. Her eyes flicked between us. My mother, God bless her, lifted her chin and said, clear as glass, "I am in pain. I am not confused. I am leaving with my son." That did it. Victor's face darkened so suddenly even the nurse took a half step back. He pointed at me. "You think this ends at a curbside stunt? You think Marianne Cole and your little rescue fantasy changed the facts? That house runs on my management, my accounts, my systems. You take her out of there, you'll see how fast things collapse." I moved between him and the wheelchair. "Move," I said. He didn't. For one ugly second, I thought I was about to have to physically force space between us. My heart was hammering. My palms were slick. The whole parking lane felt too bright, too exposed. Then the nurse spoke, calm and sharp. "Sir, step away from the patient." Victor looked at her like he couldn't believe she existed. She didn't blink. Something about being publicly corrected by a stranger seemed to snap his self-preservation back into place. He gave me one last look, one I knew I'd remember for years, and stepped back. "You'll regret this," he said. Maybe once I would have believed him. Now it just sounded like a man hearing a locked door for the first time. I loaded my mother into my SUV myself, folded the wheelchair, got her settled with a pillow against her abdomen and the discharge bag at her feet. She looked drained, but lighter somehow. Not safe yet, not healed, but lighter. Victor didn't drive away until we did. The ride to Columbus took nearly 3 hours because I drove like I was carrying glass. My mother slept for part of it, waking only when we hit rough pavement or when I asked if she needed water. Near dusk, she opened her eyes and looked out at the highway, all that wet gray light stretching ahead. I thought he'd follow us. He might still. She nodded faintly. He hates losing an audience. That line stayed with me. When we finally got to my townhouse, I helped her inside one careful step at a time. I had already set up the downstairs guest room with fresh sheets, extra pillows, her medications lined up on the nightstand, crackers, ginger tea, bottled water, a small lamp with warm light instead of the overhead glare she hated. She stood in the doorway for a second, looking at it. Then she started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just one hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking from exhaustion and relief. I held her as carefully as I could. "You're safe here," I said into her hair. She nodded against my chest. I don't remember the last time I believed that. That night, after she finally fell asleep, I sat alone at my kitchen table with Marianne on speakerphone and every document I could find spread out in front of me. My mother had texted me photos weeks earlier without realizing how important they'd become. A corner of a packet on the dining table, Victor's handwriting on a yellow sticky note, a half-visible header that read Transfer Election Summary. Marianne was quiet for a long time while she reviewed the images I forwarded. Then she exhaled. He was trying to create a paper trail toward occupancy consolidation and survivorship leverage, she said. Messy, aggressive, but not impossible to stop. Can he force anything now? Not if your mother stays firm and competent. But we move fast. Tomorrow, I'm filing formal notice that all estate-related communications must come through counsel. We'll also freeze any attempted revisions tied to trust property until your mother has an independent medical competency statement on file. I rubbed both hands over my face. How long until he realizes he's boxed out? Probably already has. She was right, because at 11:17 p.m., my phone lit up with Victor's name. Then again, I let it ring. A minute later, a text came through. You are interfering in a marriage you do not understand. Another one followed. Bring her back before you make this uglier. And then the one that made my stomach go cold. If she thinks that house stays hers without me, she's been badly advised. I screenshotted everything and sent it to Marianne. Her reply came in under a minute. Good. Let him keep talking. The next morning, my mother was stronger, still sore, still moving slowly, but clearer. She drank tea at my kitchen island in one of my old sweatshirts. Looking 10 years older and 10 years freer at the same time, I slid my phone toward her. You need to see these. She read Victor's texts in silence. Her mouth tightened. Then she set the phone down very gently. He always gets meaner when he realizes charm has failed. Do you want to answer him? She thought for a moment. Then she said yes. I handed her the phone. Her fingers trembled a little, but not from fear this time. More from weakness, from surgery, from the sheer effort of finally choosing herself. She typed slowly, do not contact my son again. All communication goes through Marianne Cole. I am not returning to the house with you. I did not and will not sign any property documents. This is my decision. She stared at the screen for a second before hitting send. Then she put the phone down and closed her eyes. I swear the whole room changed. Not magically, not instantly, but something shifted, like a deadbolt turning. Victor called once more after that. Marianne answered from her office. He didn't call again. Over the next 2 weeks, the truth came apart in layers. Marianne's team pulled records. Victor had made 2 quiet attempts to meet with a refinancing consultant. He had emailed a title specialist asking vague questions about spousal survivorship benefits on premarital trust property. He had even drafted a statement, never filed, suggesting my mother wished to simplify legacy holdings in favor of marital continuity. Marital continuity. The man talked like a brochure and schemed like a thief. When Marianne read us the summary over video call, my mother went white. I knew he was pushing, she whispered. I didn't know he'd already moved that far. Marianne adjusted her glasses. People like Victor count on fatigue, on politeness, on the hope that no one will look too closely. I looked at my mother. She looked back at me. Neither of us said it, but we were thinking the same thing. He almost got away with it. The final confrontation happened a month later in Marianne's conference room. My mother insisted on being there in person. She was stronger by then. Still healing, but upright. Composed, wearing a navy sweater and the pearl earrings my father had given her on their 10th anniversary. The sight of those earrings nearly wrecked me. Victor arrived 10 minutes late. He walked in with a lawyer of his own, and the same expression he wore to every charity dinner and neighborhood fundraiser. Controlled, pleasant, slightly offended, as if this whole thing was beneath him. He didn't look at me first. He looked at my mother. Claire, he said softly, this has gone far enough. My mother sat straighter. Yes, she said, it has. For 2 hours, the lawyers talked through occupancy rights, trust boundaries, attempted interference, document access, and formal separation of financial authority. Victor denied intent, denied pressure, denied impropriety, claimed every inquiry had been administrative curiosity. Marianne dismantled him line by line, the texts, the draft language, the consultant contacts, the timing around surgery, the packet. By the end, even Victor's lawyer looked tired of him. Then my mother spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. You spent years behaving as if my grief made me manageable. Then you behaved as if my illness made me weak enough to sign away what Daniel built for me and for Nolan. You were wrong. Victor opened his mouth. She lifted a hand. No, you've spoken over enough of my life. I felt my throat close. She kept going. You will vacate Briar Glen within 10 days. You will not contact me except through counsel. You will not enter any room in that house that contains trust records, family papers, or my late husband's effects. And if you attempt to challenge any of this through manipulation, delay, or intimidation, I will testify to every pressure tactic you used while I was recovering from surgery. Silence. Victor stared at her like he had never seen her before. Maybe he hadn't. Then, finally, he looked at me. There was hate there. Real hate. But also something else. Defeat. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that arrives when a man realizes the stage lights are gone and now everyone can see the wires. He signed. 10 days later, he was out. My mother chose not to move back into Briar Glen immediately. Not because she had lost it. Quite the opposite, because now it was truly hers again, and she wanted to return on her own terms. We spent the fall restoring it. Not renovating, restoring. We took down Victor's golf print from the hallway, repainted the dining room the soft cream my mother loved, moved my father's old oak desk back into the study, found boxes in the attic full of photographs, recipe cards, tax folders, and one wool scarf that still smelled faintly, impossibly, like cedar and winter. Not Victor's cedar. My father's. The first night my mother slept there again, I stayed over on the old couch downstairs just in case she needed anything. Around midnight, I heard her walking softly through the hall. I found her standing in the kitchen in the dark, one hand resting on the counter. You okay? I asked. She nodded. Then she smiled. Small, real. It finally sounds like my house again. That was the moment I knew we had won. Not in the legal sense, not even in the practical one. We won because the rooms were ours again. Because she could breathe. Because his voice no longer lived in the walls. If you've ever watched someone you love shrink themselves to survive a controlling person, then you know this truth. Freedom doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it sounds like a quiet kitchen at midnight, like a woman saying no and meaning it, like a son finally believing his memory over a manipulator's script. Victor wanted a weakened woman, a signed paper, and a stolen legacy. What he got instead was me at a hospital curb, my mother finding her spine, and a lawyer with a very long memory. And in the end, the house stayed exactly where it belonged,